Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Review Saturday Conversation Show, an interview series where I talk to entertainment personalities, content creators, and filmmakers about their work and love of film. Today's guest is Stelio Savante, an actor and producer who over the last 40 years has established himself as an in-demand talent with over 140 credits to his name, the latest being Between Borders, which is now streaming. From his home of South Africa to the boards of New York City and film sets of Hollywood, Stelio's life and career is a reminder of how hard work and faith in one's God-given abilities can turn a career in the entertainment industry into a reality. And I'm so glad to say that Stelio, you're joining me today. You and I, we've always been in touch online all the time. Now here we are, get a chance to talk, and yeah, it's good. I'm really looking forward to this, and it's a pleasure to be able to see your face and talk to you. How are you today?
Likewise, and back at you. I've enjoyed, as I mentioned earlier, I enjoyed reading your reviews and your support of a lot of the films I have been in over the years, but also the very astute commentary you've given to films in the independent film lane, which don't always get the attention that they need. And I'm delighted we're finally getting to speak. And I'm well, thank you. How are you? Are you well?
I am well. Thank you very much for asking me. And over the last week or so, been able to do a deep dive into your life and career. And a lot of people know that you're born in South Africa. What did you think about when you were born in South Africa at the time, which was like 1970, right? Is when you were born in Cape
Yes.
Town. I read that in an interview you were talking about how you didn't like back then it wasn't like where you were that much exposure to kind of like TV and movies and such. It was like 1978 when you first saw TV. It was kind of like BBC stuff, right? Like British stuff and all that. With regards to movies though, was there anything like might be just ignorance on my part asking this, cinema, theater, or anything like that where you can watch things, or was it just the TV and the very kind of limited kind of like British kind of comedies and such that you had access to? Was that pretty much the diet in regards to that type of content and entertainment?
Yeah, no, actually, it's a very good question. Television wise, 78, we got essentially SABC, South African Broadcasting Corporation, would start with a show program, which would conclude with the epilogue, I think at around 8 o'clock at night. And a
Mm.
lot of what we got, being a Commonwealth country, was passed over from the BBC. However, my parents would often go to the cinema, the movie theater. And in addition to that, one of my father's very closest friends owned a Betamax and VHS store.
Mm.
And it was kind of strange because there were certain homes that didn't have TVs, but his friend had, video recording machines, they were called, both Beta and VHS. And he would get the latest films from Europe, latest films from the US. And we'd go to his house, he'd put a sheet up on his wall and we'd screen them and loved it. We'd go at least twice a month. And it was fascinating for me as a child because we were very sort of entertainment and media wise sheltered by the apartheid government in terms of just from the most raw level, even at the late Athol Fugard, who just passed, we weren't even allowed to read his plays. So there was a kind of this big brother overreach of what we were allowed to consume. And it was all very basic. There was nothing appealing, especially for like young kids, teenagers. So when we did go to the cinema, the movie theater, and especially when we went to go visit our friends, we were able to consume a lot of different genre and watch, Steve McQueen and Yul Brynner and Burt Reynolds, and then a lot of great European fare, Alain Delon, a young Gerard Depardieu, those kind of projects. Obviously, a lot of the British films that were big in that era, a lot of Michael Caine content. And I sort of just took to it as a child. It amazed me. It kind of created this opportunity to escape and be introduced to many different worlds. Because back then, internet didn't exist.
Mm.
I've been around since the Last Supper. I'm old, so because of that, I've seen kind of the trajectory and the phases that we've gone through with media, which are still constantly changing. So yeah, that was there definitely was an assortment and a library of things to choose from. And then once beta and VHS became the norm, I mean, we were in the video store three, four times a week, couldn't get hands-on content quick enough.
Were there any type of movies in particular, whether you saw them on beta, VHS, or in the cinema, that really stood out for you? Especially looking back now, maybe left an impression, maybe planted that seed that maybe you thought to yourself, hey, that's kind of like something that early on maybe you want to think, hey, I could do this myself one day.
I don't know about the latter part of it because no one really grew up, at least when I was growing up in South Africa, wanting to pursue necessarily a career in entertainment. That didn't really exist for us. But I will say that the there were four or five films that just made a huge impression for me growing up as a child. Both Godfather films.
Hmm.
I found I found them very seductive. They had this allure of these families and these men who lived lives who were gangsters, but it was organized crime, so they protected people kind of under their umbrella. And it was a world that I really took to early on, seeing Le Samurai, the Jean-Pierre Melville film with Alain Delon, who was just 60 foot tall when I was a kid. Um, I remember I remember I did a play at school and I wanted to find a raincoat that looked similar to what he wore in that film
Hmm.
and the fedoras. So yeah, those did kind of make a very strong impression from childhood. There's no doubt.
So fast forward here, 1990, you go to the US, University of West Alabama, tennis scholarship. You head over there. So you love watching movies, you're a pursuer of films and such, but like you said, you had restrictions back in Cape Town. So once you go to the US, the floodgates just open in regards to what you can watch, and if so, what was it that you kind of gravitated to that you couldn't watch beforehand that maybe you did watch when you were in the US at that time?
My first 2 years in the US, there was almost I would say a void in terms of that simply because for me it was such a huge leap leaving my family, everything I knew behind, moving to a new country. Life in Alabama, there were actually a lot of similarities with Cape Town, but then there were several things that were very, very different. And it was extremely challenging for me. In addition to that, and what actually led me to get into this career were ironically all the pretty girls at West Alabama were a lot of them were in the theater department, and I thought that's where I want to be is in the theater department. And I started asking for playback of a lot of the plays. And one of the girls who I think was a junior or a senior at the time, she actually mocked me. She said, "You're obsessed with watching yourself." And I said, "No, I'm watching back to learn. I'm trying to understand how things are different on camera versus how they are on stage,
Hmm.
how gestures are perceived physically and how they transport to camera and how the mediums couldn't possibly be more different." And they did have kind of a like a film forum group. It wasn't titled that officially, but every Friday at our university, they would show two films back to back. And it started reminding me how much I loved. And then I just went completely crazy getting cable and sort of absorbing and falling in, disappearing into a world of consuming a lot of great films and eras that I maybe had not had access to seeing a lot of that kind of stuff in terms of cinema, real cinema, before CGI and huge budgets were around. Not that studio films didn't exist, but filmmakers back there were really students of the craft. They knew how to write a great script. There weren't as many remakes, and it was truly an artistry form, whereas today it's become far more of a business than anything else. The emphasis is on the business side of show business. And then I went full into it. And once the bug bit me and kind of found me, and it came to me naturally to where I just, even though I had no process and was clueless, there was a raw ability to be able to tap into what I felt I could bring to a character. And that put me in the express lane of consuming as much film as I could, not television series, but just film. I just loved that lane. And independent film, foreign film, character-driven stories mostly, not big, massive studio films. And granted, back then, the DC comic book universe didn't really exist. It was studio films back then were different. They'd have certain stars attached to them, and they weren't necessarily, Star Wars was obviously the most obvious example. But outside of that, I remember watching simple films like a Swiss Italian film called Bread and Chocolate, which is about a man who's on the unemployment line and has to eat bread and chocolate on his days off to survive. Couldn't get enough of that stuff because I identified with it because my parents, my father moved to South Africa as an immigrant, as a lot of Italians, Greeks, Portuguese, Spanish did during the 60s and 70s. And from there, the head of the theater department in um, at West Alabama said, "We've never really had anybody like you come through here. You really love it. You have an incredible passion for it, and you have the talent. Why don't you, if you're thinking of pursuing this as a career and you're heading to New York anyway, because that's where my girlfriend lived, who I'd actually met in South Africa. She was a New Yorker.
Mm.
He said, why don't you look up some of the following people? Because he'd had an excellent career himself as a director. And then, yeah, then it just became, um, what I could realistically consider pursuing as a career.
1992 is when you head over to New York. Theater actor, theater is like your life at that time. What's New York like in 1992? I'm really curious about that. What's the environment like at that time? What's because New York is going through many phases over the last decades. And in the early 90s, I'm just curious about what that was like.
Very interesting question because it's every neighborhood kind of had its own pocket or beat, and we lived on the Upper West Side. Um, the subway is really the heart and pulse of the city. Very small percentage of people who live in New York City drive, and it was an exciting time. The neighborhood that we lived in had just started to gentrify. We lived across from Needle Park, which is actually, sorry, let me just plug in my charger. Um, it's actually the same Needle Park that was used in the title of Al Pacino's first film.
Yeah, Panic in Needle Park. Yeah.
And yes, yes, exactly right. Panic and Needle Park. And it was this wonderful world in the early 90s of um, exploring and finding theater and consuming a tremendous amount of theater. And for me, I didn't care about big Broadway musicals that bored the living daylights out of me. I was more interested in, you know, um, Eli Wallach was constantly doing plays, the late great Eli Wallach,
Mm.
just 2 blocks from my house. It was this sort of hole in the wall theater, but the quality of the work that was being done was tremendous. It was a time in the early 90s when night sessions had become the thing, kind of at the US Open, and I was still a massive follower of tennis. Um, it was a struggle because you don't make a lot of money making theater in New York, even with Lord contracts. It's not enough to survive. But what it did become was a very rich well of being able to learn the craft. And then after a while being, gosh, 2.5 decades, becoming bored with it because I felt it was a very limited medium and that it didn't transport as much, that it didn't use as many of the other art forms in it as what film did. And although a lot of people, a lot of great artists have said theater is the actor's medium, and I would agree with that to a certain extent. What I like about film is that it is more collaborative, that you are a link on a chain, that you do get to organically discover and creatively converge simultaneously with other artists. and it isn't just talk, talk, talk. Uh, uh, but yeah, that was a very exciting time for me. In New York City, I was this kid who um, had lived in South Africa. I'd lived in Europe when I was 16 for just 3 months, and then Alabama. So going to New York, I was talk about a fish out of water. It was very intimidating, but then I couldn't get enough of it. I loved it. You walk everywhere. There were outdoor cafes. It was crime wasn't as bad then as it is now in New York City. And it was just a very exciting time. Early 90s in New York was great. And you had a lot of the hardcore mainstream New York talent like Pacino that was constantly doing theater. I started being invited into a lot of what the um, actors unit at the actor studio was doing by Ed Satrakian, who was Al's best friend, was directed by him, did a play with him, and the Lincoln Film Center Society was only about 8 blocks from excuse me, I beg your pardon, from our house. So we were constantly going to see a lot of good content and tributes to artists and learning about their process. A lot of those things don't exist anymore. I'll finish with this. The greatest film theater in the world, it was called Lincoln Plaza. They had 6 screens, and they would mostly only have foreign films and independent film. And once a month, they'd have film collectives from different countries. You could really consume the great films from Iran, the wonderful Abbas Kiarostami. They'd have Japanese film forum weekend, and they'd show films of Akira Kurosawa and then French New Wave and Italian neorealism. Those theaters are gone. They went out of business during COVID, but the early 90s was when they were exploding. They couldn't have enough screenings. Um, I miss it. I miss that time, and I miss the artistry of that time. It seems to be very much missing.
Well, you know how the song goes, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And clearly you've really thrived because here we are now, so how many years later, and yeah, it seems like your time in New York. It's one of the places I really want to visit. It's something. It's kind of like with movies. I love crime movies, but for some reason I like New York crime movies better than Los Angeles. I don't know what crime. I don't know what it is. I think it might be the architecture. Maybe it's just the type of actors that are associated with those movies. Because I'm the biggest, like for example, I'm the biggest Pacino fan in the world. So a lot of these films are New York based. But yeah, I think it would be, fascinating to be there all the way back in the 90s. And I reckon New York in the 70s would have been a trip as well. But yeah, that's
Yes,
yeah. We don't have a time machine, so we can only imagine really. Um I want to move on to this game I like to play with my guests. It's called Choose Between Two. So I'm going to give you an option between two things. You're going to choose one and you're just going to abbreviate on it. Are you ready to play?
sure.
All right, let's start off. Stage or screen?
Screen.
Ah, that was pretty
Um,
quick.
Screen, no doubt. And you want me to elaborate on it a little?
Please, please.
Yeah, screen. So for me, um, what I have discovered with film, and I discovered this about, as I said, 2.5 decades in of doing theater, is that film is the greatest art form simply because it combines all the other arts. It starts with writing, and that moves to directing, acting, projection, cinematography, hair, makeup, music, score, composition. It all comes together, and then back then in its purest form, you would go to an empty theater home. The cinema would fill. You'd be sitting in darkness with hundreds of people you don't know, all experiencing it live at the same time. All of those art forms combined. And that film, that project has a chance to transport and influence millions. Now, with the streaming world today, we do still get that, but that's where I feel stage for me became boring and limited.
Very interesting. Next one. Al Pacino or Robert De Niro?
Al Pacino.
Yeah, me too.
Um, yes, if you take just 5 films early in his career, The Two Godfathers and Justice for All, Dog Day Afternoon, and Serpico, he could have stopped right there and had a career like John Casal did, which meant he only did great projects. Um, but I had the honor and pleasure of meeting him twice because his best friend directed me. He came to see me in a play, was very complimentary of my work, which I just like I thought I was going to die because at that point I'd been pursuing it for so long. And it was confirmation to me that maybe this is something I was meant to do, but also simply because Al always goes back to the stage
Mm.
and continued to go back to the stage. He never forgot his roots. Um, and you know, they're both incredibly talented, but I always gravitated towards Al, especially early Al, and especially on stage Al.
Yeah, he's a like I'm just like I said, my I always liked films when I was a kid. I was watching action films and such, but it was when I watched Serpico. It was on late on TV here in Australia in Sydney. I was like 18, 19. And that just changed everything because when I watched that, I was like, oh, I want to watch more of this guy. And when I watched his movies, then I watched more Coppola. And then Coppola's like, oh, who's De Niro? And then De Niro's Scorsese and Scorsese. Then it just kind of just opened up this world. And here I am, like,
Yes,
how many years later? And
it's an exciting.
yeah, all I went to Serpico, 100%.
Yeah, no, I will go back and watch so many movies of the yesteryear. I just recently put on Night Moves with the late Gene Hackman
I
passing,
just
who I
watched
think
that
is
last
possibly,
week. I just watched that
oh,
last week. Yeah.
how great a film, how great a film. But uh, here's what I wanted to say is I think you are lucky with where you are now because a lot of you mentioned crime and noir, which has been my favorite genre since childhood. The films that Ivan Sen and David Michôd are making are phenomenal.
Mm.
When you go back and watch The Rover or Mystery Road, I mean, a lot of great content coming out of Australia.
Oh yeah, I agree, and there's great filmmakers here as well. And those two directors, Ivan especially, um, he had a movie that came out last year called Tumula, which was I think it was a black and white film shot in Cooper Pedy, starred Simon Baker. I don't know if you got a chance to see that. I'm pretty sure it was called
I know
Tumula. I
what
gotta
it is.
double
I have
check that.
not had a chance to see it. Did you like it?
Oh, I loved it, and I got a chance to talk to both Ivan. I've talked to Ivan a couple of times, Ivan and Simon, about the movie. It's a fantastic kind of like outback film noir, but shot in black and white. I don't know if ever heard of Cooper Pedy in Australia. It's kind of like almost kind of like looks like Martian territory, like in the outback though, and like there's like homes are inside caves and stuff like this. It's a fantastic, just interesting place. A great place to set a noir, Australian noir, that's for sure. Um,
Oh no, those films are. I should put you together with. Have you interviewed Alex Russell before?
Alex Russell, the actor.
Yes.
I think once he had a movie years ago called Wasted on the Young. Um,
Okay.
Years and but I'm talking like 2011, 2013, like years ago. I think I interviewed him back then, but I'm not 100%.
He was in. He was in the. He was in the movie that I think it's Sen that did right before. No, yeah, it's Ivan Sen right before he did Mystery Road. It was an incredible Australian film that Alex was in that
Oh,
he
was it
did.
not Goldstone?
That's it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
great film. Those films,
Yeah,
like I think,
he's
yeah.
fantastic. I
Mm,
worked with him. We did a noir film here in Los Angeles a few years ago called Blood in the Water with Willa Holland, who's Brian De Palma's stepdaughter.
hmm
And I loved working with Russell. And then with Alex, Alex then became a series regular for 1 or 2 seasons on SWAT, which I just worked on. And they just got canceled. They're trying to get it placed for season 9. But I always loved his work. I feel like that there's a lot of great stuff ahead of Alex's career. And it's been great to see Guy Pearce getting his due. He's just tremendous. I love his work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Australia represent absolutely. Um, Next one, New York or Los Angeles?
Ooh. I have to pick one.
Yeah.
Okay, if it was the 90s, I would say New York. If it's now, I'd have to say Los Angeles because my daughter was born here
hmm
just over 18 years ago. We moved out here It's been very kind to my career, my life. I'm I'm pretty heavily involved with my church and ministry here and life group. The climate is great. It reminds me a lot of Cape Town. There's a lot of things about Los Angeles that have made it very difficult to live in, especially as homeowners the last few years.
Hmm.
But if I could combine New York's people and culture with Los Angeles's climate and canyons, um, I would take the best of both worlds, both great cities.
Last one. You're at the cinema. You sit down in your seat. What's your snack of choice? Popcorn or candy?
Probably popcorn.
Do you like just like good butter, salt, nothing else, or do you go for different varieties?
I used to like it. There was a certain brand that they would make here in the movie theaters that was dry. It didn't have a lot of butter on it. It was phenomenal. For some reason, I don't know if they changed brands. They don't make it anymore. But I used to like chocolate more. They used to have snow caps. They're hard to find now. They were these little like chocolate. Can't remember what they're called, like petite pearls or something, with little white like sprinkles on them. But no, I prefer probably popcorn.
The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. I want to talk about the transition from theatre to screen, big and small. You appearing in shows like SVU, Sopranos, etc. I saw an interview with you where you're talking about how the early days of like especially in regards to the screen stuff, it was very difficult. Especially just in regards to the amount of talent you kind of have to compete against. Like you'll go to an audition and then, Billy Baldwin will walk out of a room and Mark Ruffalo's name will be in the sheet and everything else. And you're like, oh, okay, this is what I'm up for. What's it like during those early days? And for a lot of people listening who might be, in the same kind of boat now as working actors or thinking of doing it, um, what kind of advice could you give to people who might find themselves struggling, landing gigs or stuff? What would you say to them in regards to, I don't know, persistence, consistency, and also just having, the faith not only in your abilities, but a faith that, God is just looking out for you and wherever you are, it's where you're meant to be. But you just keep pursuing what you're after and you'll get to where you need to be.
Yeah, I love the way you asked that question and expressed it. I think there's so much discernment and food for thought just with what you said. Um, I lucked out very early on in New York with one thing. I had great teachers,
Hmm.
and the one thing the late Mr. Modica said to me was, you're competing against yourself. You're not competing against anyone else.
Yeah.
What you bring into that audition, into that room, into that opportunity is a chance to connect in a way that nobody else will. And most of the time, the role is cast before you even go in, so there's no pressure. Or they don't know what they're looking for till you get there, in which case they want to see you, not the way you think the scene should be played. They want you to bring Stelio to the scene. And once I really leaned into that, it liberated me completely because I realized that those sometimes 2 minutes, 3 minutes that you have are all about them seeing what you bring. And what you bring is based on your life experiences. It's based on your discernment of a specific character and their need in the moment, what's driving their character, what their need is from the other character in the scene, their opinion of the other character. And not everybody's going to respond to that the same way. Your life experiences will help inform what your responses are going to be and how you're going to go about getting your needs from the other character. Um, but you mentioned the element of faith, and I do have I lean very heavily into my faith as a highly flawed follower of Jesus Christ. And back then, I might not have been mature enough to understand that there were certain things that were being kept from me for my own protection. There were other roles that I should have been more open to. Ultimately, I'm very grateful to be where I am now, my 33rd or 34th year doing this. I do somehow wish I'd had better discernment, turning down projects I had no business being in, especially now as a father. And, you look back at it and you go, my gosh, what was I thinking? But sometimes it's tough because offers come in for work, work begets work, and you establish a rate and it's easy to say yes. So yeah, to the first part of your question, I think for people starting out, realize that your true life experiences, living your life as actively as you can, will make you a better storyteller. It will help inform others that are watching you of why your need to connect is so unique because you're bringing yourself to it. And take the pressure off yourself. You're not going there to book a job. If that's your goal, you're going to have a very hard time in this business because you're going to get rejected far more than you'll be offered something. You're going in there to connect something that is important to you that you have to tell the other person or other people that are in the scene with you. Once you start working more, it's important that you have people pouring into your life who will give you advice. So, actors who are journeymen, famous or not, probably better if they're not famous because those situations are so unique. You want somebody who struggled through it and had success so they could help give you advice on what to avoid and what happens when you're in the valley and you have those pitfalls. And also having people with me, I was blessed. My mother believed in me and poured prayer into my career, and that helped me a lot because I knew there was then a responsibility to be able to help tell a certain kind of story. And once I was able to have just a teeny bit of success, which I've been blessed to have, then be able to pursue certain directors and projects and have my reps look out for them. And I think it's important to have that guidance throughout your career. Never be afraid to stop learning. Never be afraid to be a sponge. Never be afraid to try to master camera. I worked with the great Roger Deakins very early on, and I learned
Mm,
more in 2 days of working with him in a role that was it wasn't a large role, but to me, the learning experience was so large, learning about camera, learning about just certain, just golden nuggets, not tricks, but just certain truths that I think from a pure artistry perspective were very helpful for me. They helped me understand from the outside looking in than rather being stuck in the middle of it. And finally, I would just say to people starting out that they do have to understand in this era, it is very much a business. And there's so much that comes with it that never came with it when I started out, social media being one of them. We live in a world now where um, a lot of shows and films are casting influencers with big followings. They're casting people who they will have their casting directors go and look at what they're posting on social media. So be responsible because if there's a certain genre, if it's neo or crime, neo noir or crime or western or whatever it is, make yourself user friendly by using your content to get that out there,
mm,
because it'll go a long way towards you getting hired. In addition to that, be prepared. Once you do get it, you're going to have contracts you have to sign that agree. Well, up until not too long ago, it was tweeting live. Now X has changed that a little bit, but you have to go on IG live and they'll have cast on talking about a show at the same time. So the business has changed a lot. And I think because of technology, filmmaking styles have changed a lot. And I would challenge young actors to consume as much of the lane that they want to be part of as possible. If independent film is your thing, if character driven material is your thing, if studio films and DC comic book films are your thing, or whether it's sitcoms, watch the great directors, watch the successful actors, watch the cinematography and all of those. Get an understanding of not only the style, but where you fit in and how you then improve to put yourself in a position to do that. Don't rely on others. Stay active and create content and do theater. You have to more than ever.
I think something that I've learned over the years, in a lot of the same lessons that you spoke about, a lot of the same advice that you came about, is also in my industry as well, when it comes to like journalism and media and all that stuff. That's an ever-changing thing, especially social media. Influencers have definitely taken over the kind of like the sphere of that stuff, to the point where over the last year, my demand as a writer and such has been, diminished, because
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere.
I want to move on to this other game I like to play called Rapid Fire Questions. Just going to throw some questions to you. The first thing that pops in your head, let me know, and then we can elaborate on the answer. All right.
Sure.
First question. Who's a director that you would love to work with?
Gosh, it's hard to pick one. Um, you know, I've been friends with Wayne Kramer for years.
Hmm.
Wayne Kramer, who did fellow South African, who did The Cooler.
Yep.
He did Crossing Over. He did Pawn Shop Chronicles, and
Running
he
Scared.
has two. Running Scared is my favorite film of his. I
Hmm.
completely adore that film, and I'm friends with some of the cast and had great conversations. And he has two projects on the horizon. One of them is very close to going. And I wanted to work with him way before I knew him. I was actually producing a play and reached out to his reps to offer him the opportunity to direct it. He wasn't available, and then we met and became friends probably close to, my gosh, I'd say 15, 16 years ago. And I'd love to work with him because that genre that you and I talk about that we love, he's masterful at it.
Hmm. I mean, you just mentioned Running Scared, the Cooler. I absolutely adore that movie. I think it's great as well. I think it's got some of the best performances from. It's a great cast. That to me is the movie that made William H Macy to like the supporting guy to like someone like where he can do like after that Shameless and all these other things. I think that performance
Yeah,
alone
that was the
was the one
cooler
really
though. That
transitioned that. Yeah, the Cooler. Yeah,
yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. That role put him on the map and literally he defined his own lane. And same thing for Alec Baldwin got his Academy Award nomination because of that
yeah.
film. But Running Scared, I mean, the performances in that film, I got to work with Ivana Milicevic. We had a great conversation, and then Wayne actually was on a podcast and interviewed her about her role in Casino Royale. I was friends with Johnny Messner for years, worked with him, but that great actress, and Wayne said she's the greatest actor he's ever worked with. She played the housewife. She's on Bates Motel. What is wrong with me?
Oh, Vera Farmiga.
Thank you.
Mm,
He said process and what she brought was just masterful. I love that film. The scenes in the ice skating rink were just brilliant.
great film. Um,
Yeah,
who is your favorite James Bond?
it's a toss up between, for the longest time, it was Connery. No, he was untouchable. But then, you know, I think what Daniel Craig did was he redefined the role and made it his own and brought a ruggedness and simultaneously a vulnerability that we'd never seen. Now, I will say, I think the writing through Daniel Craig's journey with Bond was far superior to anything that the character had ever been given before.
Hmm.
So it's a combo of the two of them. Connery was just so believable and effortless in the role to me. I was not a fan of um he was fantastic, but I was just not a fan of Roger Moore as Bond. It felt soapy and just weak to me. Timothy Dalton, who's an incredible actor, was just too much the other way. It was
Hmm.
as if we were watching, I don't know, play. Um, I actually did very much like on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Gosh,
Oh,
George.
Lesenby?
Yes,
Yeah.
I thought there was a charm there, and in certain scenes you can actually see the choices he makes. He's nervous, but it actually worked. But I think Craig, I, uh, the ability because of his great instrument as an actor, as a storyteller, to be able to tap in the writing that they gave Bond, where you see the character has doubt, you see that the character deals with self-loathing and hatred, and I beg your pardon, and then questioning the system. I felt that um, it's hard to think of Bond without thinking of him now, and for the longest time, Goldfinger was my favorite Bond film, but it's very difficult to not put Casino Royale and possibly even Skyfall up there. I also think what has helped it a lot is the combination of CGI, stunts, and fight choreography. Although that being said, From Russia with Love, which is also one of my top favorite films, the fight choreography in that was incredible. The fight scene on the train.
Oh, that's one of my favorite Bond fight scenes between Robert Shaw and Sean Connery. I love
Yes,
that scene. It's just great because it's just these really kind of like because they're both like really kind of statute, kind of muscular kind of
yes,
guys, and they're just like confined space and all that. I thought it was really impressive, especially for the time. I think it was 1963 or something when that film came out. So, yeah.
exactly. No, they were ahead of their time. And Robert Shaw, it didn't matter what role he played, he inhabited it so well. You weren't watching an actor; you were actually just watching a real portrayal. Yeah, no, agreed.
Last one, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Um, no,
And you are
no, I'm
correct.
a little bit. What's that? I'm correct.
Yes.
I'm a little bit more of a purist, when we lived in Astoria, Queens in New York, we had moved there from Manhattan. Some of the old school Italian brick oven pizza places would have very interesting, they would have prosciutto and they would have uh arugula, and it was great because it was brick oven style, but pineapple on pizza, yeah, it's just never worked for me.
No, me either. And it shouldn't work for anyone. And if it does work for anyone, then I think we should get a exorcist for them and get that demon out of them. Um, just want to wrap it up here. I want to talk about, we talked about both of us being men of faith, both being Christians. Um, Being a Christian in the entertainment space, especially now you've been in Los Angeles for how many, for a number of years now, working in Hollywood. It's really interesting to me watching the evolution of that. For a long time, people kind of cowered from their faith and they wouldn't show it. But usually it takes maybe one or two people to kind of say, no, this is who I am and this is, what I believe in. And then others will be willing to move forward. And now you look now, Chris Pratt, Zachary Levy, so many people, Mark Wahlberg, Neil McDonough, Andy Garcia has long been a long professed Christian as well. So many people now are open about their faith and such. What was it like for you previously compared to now in regards to that? Is it very much like a night and day kind of situation? Do you find that the industry is more open and accepting to Christian viewpoints and Christian actors? I'm not saying that people never got hired, but I would assume, as you were saying before about this time of social media, that if someone went online 10 years ago and professed their Christianity, that maybe that not wouldn't bode well at that time as compared to today.
You know, what has changed? So I'll start at the end and then kind of navigate my way through to the heart of what you're asking. What has changed so much in our industry, and I hate that this has even become a term, but literally added to Westerns, horrors, crime, neo-noir is faith-based, right? And
Yeah.
um, for the longest time, that was a dirty word, even for those of us who were believers, because the faith-based product was awful. It was terrible. The writing was just embarrassing. The acting was so beyond melodramatic. And yet I felt God sometimes saying, "You're being very harsh on people. I wrote my word, the New Testament and the Old Testament, for both believers and non-believers. And if you look at a lot of the New Testament, it's actually written for believers, right? But we are called, in terms of the Great Commission, to go out and share the gospel with all of the world. So, the same way that this book right here is written for both believer and non-believer, there are films that are made for the church and non-believers. And what has given us permission to speak about who we are personally is that so-called genre, and The Chosen has so much to do with this,
Mm.
has now the artistry, because we finally have believers that are like, okay, so many great films coming out of Hollywood had incredible artistic execution, but the messages were horrible. They were dark and spiritually vacuous and bankrupt. The flip side of that is, for the longest time, faith-based films, all they had going for them was message, which for the church is fine, but artistically, it was embarrassing. The last 10, 15 years, and this is after the Passion of the Christ, we've encountered Hollywood discovering that the faith-based genre and audience has not been met, so it's a way for us to make money. And that has given that lane permission. You've got Lionsgate, which has partnered with Kingdom Story. Last year, Lionsgate most successful film was Best Christmas Pageant Ever. My friend Dallas Jenkins, who's directed me 3 times, including on The Chosen, directed that. Last year, I worked with and spent quite a bit of time and got to know Zachary Levi. We did a Kingdom Story film based on Sarah Rector, this country's first Black teenage millionaire. Wonderful, very wise girl who sold this land that that the government doesn't realize has oil under it, but the second they do, of course, they're going to try to exploit it and take advantage.
Mm.
And in getting to see and understand how films that were made in the 70s and 80s, and I'm not going to mention the filmmakers because it's going to sound harsh, but then that became pure flicks, and there was sort of a formula. There was what we would call perfect, almost perfect people, and then a redemption scene, and then the altar scene. And I'm not criticizing it. This is just what the formula is. Then that kind of evolved into here's a Kingdom Stories project. Here's the way we make our films, and they're not only for the church. In fact, they're not sermons or religious films at all. Um, Schindler's List was a faith-based film, but it had to do with the Jewish faith. So
Mm.
um, that genre, because it's gotten better and is starting to get more legitimacy, has given a lot of artists the opportunity to say, I'm only going to work in this lane, or I'm going to work in this lane and I'll work in the mainstream and other genre as long as it's not gratuitous or the character has a consequence for their sin. I think it has become easier. Two great examples. They're both Catholic brothers in Christ. Jim Caviezel has always taken a stand. I've worked with him 3 times, gotten to know him very well personally. We're very friendly. Um, we did 10 days on Person of Interest, and then we did Running for Grace in Hawaii for 6 or 7 weeks. Then we did Infidel in Jordan for again 6 or 7 weeks, working together on each set, spending time personally and understanding and hearing some of the obstacles he faced, where he was receiving scripts everyone had passed on after he did The Passion of the Christ because people associated him with Mel Gibson. And then it was ironically, J.J. Abrams, who is a Jewish believer and or from that faith, um, and JJ's producing partner reached out to Jim. Then back in 2013 or 14, Jonathan Rumi and I did a short film that was kind of one of the molding clay early foundation kind of trampolines for to catapult The Chosen. He plays Jesus. His following has grown tremendously, but he takes a stand, and I commend him for it. He will not. He doesn't. He speaks of his faith with love and helps. Um, when he's not filming, he's very much involved in lanes with bringing up stories like the Coptic Christians who lost their lives many years later. He talks about that now. So I think for the Neil McDonoughs and now even the Dennis Quaids, they are seen as having value in that genre, and audience believe them in those roles, and they will pay money to go see them. And Angel Studios, Sony affirmed these are platforms and studios that have a subdivision that people are paying for. The Angel Studios just announced today or yesterday 1 million guild members, and every time The Chosen opens in a theater for one episode, they'll make 10, 15 million over the weekend. Even between borders, Elizabeth Tabish, who plays Mary in The Chosen, is the lead in it. She's remarkable in the role, and that's somebody that audiences trust. So she's got leverage in the genre now. And I think for those of us who, because very little of my career has been, if I go all the way back, a very small percentage of it has been in projects that would be considered Christian or mainstream. And again, I wish I had had better discernment, but now being able to step into those and also kind of openly encourage and lift others up and love on people when we're on sets all over the world has been just a huge blessing. I was recently filming in Tbilisi.
Hmm.
I was filming a project based on the true life story of three of the hostages who were in the tunnels for 52 days after October 7th. Was working with Israeli producers and directors and writers. One of the actors on the set was a Palestinian Christian, and I'd met a lot of Palestinian Christians when I worked on Infidel in Jordan. Most of our crew were Palestinian Christians, and it's incredible hearing their journey and understanding how good we have it in the Western world, how easy we have it, and that allows us the opportunity to be able to tell those stories, especially if we're a little more established without being famous. We have an ability to say, okay, I am going to do this. I'd like to bring the following two or three people with me to it, and I want to give voice to this story. It's never been told before. So uh, I know that's a very long, rambled, pontificating answer, but it was just easier to address it that way just because of where we are in the industry for believers and also for audience members. I mean, it's completely changed the playing field. Who would have thought Lionsgate ever, their highest grossing film, would be a Christian film called Best Christmas
Mm.
Pageant Ever? I mean, nobody would ever have thought that.
On top of that, like a movie like Cabrini will come out and put a dent in the box office or something like. I mean,
Yes,
it's a beautiful thing to see because I've been covering faith-based films for a very long time. I started my website in film writing career back in 2006, so it was just a little after the passion, and seeing kind of
yes,
like the evolution of this, especially in the last 10 years or so, where a movie like where people like Angel Studios and Kingdom Story Company and Sony Affirm, like all of that stuff is starting to bring out really just strong content. And but like you said, at the same time, it's not just about faith-based. There's so much great content, like a movie that you were in, for example, which I absolutely love, is Nefarious, a movie, horror movie, has to do with demonic possession and everything, but 100% a faith. But you were saying before Schindler's List is a faith-based film. The Exorcist is a faith-based film. Like people don't
oh,
understand how
100%.
much of a, William Peter Blatty, that's like he was a, a Catholic and he wrote that and all that. That's a faith-based film. It's not for everyone, but then again, not every film is for everyone. And it
That's
was
right.
something that you said in a interview you did with CBN. Jesus told us to be fishers of men, but you added to that, not to be not only but to be fishers of all men, not just fishers of men in the choir. It's not just about advocating to just one section of an audience. You want to make movies for everyone, and that's a whole point of
Absolutely. We don't just want to fish in the Sea of Galilee. That's right.
yeah, we want to. In so many times, I've talked to faith-based filmmakers, and um, they might make a movie that might have violence or swearing or something in it, and then I get pushback from maybe backers or something saying, "Well, we don't make movies that way," and then they have to say, "Well, maybe the reason people aren't watching your movies is because you're not making movies that people want to see. You need to make movies that address the real life, what real life is," and I applaud anyone out there who thinks that a faith-based movie has to only advocate to one standard, only one style, and must have restrictions in there. I really advocate to once again just open up your Bible and understand that the Bible in that's the real world there, and in the real world, Jesus, the apostles, the early people in the Old Testament, they went through a lot of hardships that would have received, if it was a movie, would receive an R rating, as the Passion of Christ just showed as well. The real world can be
Yes.
ugly. The real world can be villainous. But the point is that we face the ugliness, we face the villainous, and we've got with faith in God and God on our side, we triumph over it. That's the whole point of the whole thing here. So we have to make sure that we do not take a step back anymore. I think for too long we wanted to
Absolutely.
say in our little corner, we didn't want to do anything. No,
Yes.
no more of that. We're we're in the sphere now. We're going to proclaim Christ's word, and we're going to go out there and make great movies with that spirit, the Holy Spirit by our side.
Absolute. That is beautifully poignantly said. And it actually triggered a thought in my head, inspired a thought in my head, which is the flip opposite side of that coin is also the case, meaning because they are what you said, which is they might have violence, they might have heartbreak in them, they are they can become a great form of ministry. The Chosen is a perfect example. When COVID happened and the entire world was locked down,
Mm,
you had countries all over the world whose governments, right, are control everything that they see, namely North Korea, China, Iran, you know, those the people who live in that country don't have any control over what comes through their television. The government controls it, but The Chosen was available through an app.
mm,
Governments couldn't control it. All of a sudden, we're hearing from people in China who'd never even heard the words of Jesus Christ before. They, their children, their whole family are becoming believers. So if it's well made and it's a form of ministry, it's reaching people that the traditional church cannot. Because when lockdown happens, just like when 9/11 happened, people are terrified. They're more open to prayer. The heart softens a little, and all of a sudden, the brain gets out of the way, which the Lord has to save me from myself with that every single day, because I often have to analyze instead of no, don't analyze, just be obedient or just say yes.
mm.
And The Chosen has done that. It's opened that door, and I think it's simultaneously, here's what's crazy. If you go back 12 years, just a dozen years, you'd have to wait 2, 3 years to see a film that had some sort of Christian message to it. Now there's two or three a month, and there are certain streamers that cater to that. And even beyond that, you're having incredible artists, Helen Mirren, Hilary Swank. They are Dennis Quaid. They are jumping from being known for the highest level critically acclaimed product into the world of films that are part of the Great Commission. They are a form of ministry. What more can you ask for that? It's an exciting time, there's no doubt about that.
It is an exciting time, and this has been a great conversation. Stelio, thank you so very much for your time. For everyone listening, in the show notes, I'm going to have all the social links for Stelio's, so you can check out Stelio's work. And I also recommend people check out Between Borders, available now via streaming. We be through the Angel Studios streaming service, I imagine,
So
Stelio.
yes, it's actually there's a couple. It's available on Angel Studio streaming for everybody who's a member of that platform, but it is now also available for rent and for purchase through Amazon Prime.
It's a remarkable story. I really recommend people check it out. And especially, I imagine for yourself, Stelio, being an immigrant myself, being a child of immigrants, I think it's important that stories like this continue to be told. And it's well done here. And yeah, Stelio Savante, thank you so very much for your time today, and for your advice, and for your preach, and just for your passion. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
Hey, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for asking really thought-provoking questions and having the ability to see outside beyond what most critics and interviewers have. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.